The morning Eliza's life changed forever started like every other morning in the Hale farmhouse, with her sister's laughter cutting through the walls like broken glass. She stood at the kitchen basin, hands red and raw in the cold water, scrubbing breakfast dishes while Margaret and Caroline sat at the table behind her. Their voices carried that particular tone of amusement that always meant Eliza was the subject. "Did you see her face at church yesterday?" Margaret said, barely bothering to lower her voice. "When Thomas Crawford looked right through her to smile at you?" Caroline's laugh was bright and careless. "I almost felt sorry for her. Almost." Eliza kept scrubbing. The plate in her hands had a chip on the rim, had for years. Nobody cared enough to replace it. "Mother says we should find her a husband," Margaret continued. "Says it's our Christian duty since she's already 23 and no prospects." "Who would want her?" Caroline's tone was genuinely curious, as if discussing a mildly interesting problem. "She's plain as a fence post and twice as useful." The plate slipped. Eliza caught it before it shattered, her wet hands shaking. "Maybe we should help her," Margaret said slowly. Eliza could hear the smile in her voice. "There's that advertisement in the matrimonial news. The one for mail-order brides out west." The water had gone cold. Eliza's hands had gone numb. "Margaret, that's cruel even for you," Caroline said, but she was already laughing. "Can you imagine? Eliza shipped off to some desperate rancher in the middle of nowhere? Why not? Someone might need a workhorse, and she'd be far enough away we wouldn't have to look at her anymore." Eliza turned off the water. Her hands dripped onto the floor. Neither sister noticed. "We could write the letter for her," Margaret said. "Be completely honest. Plain girl, adequate housekeeper, no romantic prospects. Some farmer probably needs exactly that." "Do it," Caroline said. "Mother will think it's charitable, and when no one responds, we can all stop pretending there's any hope for her." Eliza walked out of the kitchen. Neither sister called after her. She made it to the small room under the stairs, the one she'd occupied since childhood, while her sisters shared the large bedroom upstairs before her legs gave out. She sat on the narrow bed, hands still wet, and stared at the wall. The wall stared back, blank and indifferent. She'd known she wasn't pretty. The mirror had made that clear years ago. But hearing it said so casually, with such careless certainty, made something crack inside her chest. Plain as a fence post. No romantic prospects. Workhorse. The words settled into her bones like cold. That night, Eliza lay awake listening to her sisters whisper and giggle in the room above. The floorboards creaked with their movement. She heard Margaret say, "I actually sent it," and Caroline's delighted shriek in response. So they'd done it. Written the letter, sent her name west like a joke they could retell at parties. Eliza turned her face to the wall and waited for nothing to happen. Well, 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Eliza found it on the hall table, addressed in a firm, unfamiliar hand. Her name was spelled correctly. The return address said Tall Pine, Wyoming Territory. Her fingers went cold. Margaret emerged from the parlor, saw the letter, and her face lit up with malicious delight. "Oh, this is too perfect! Caroline, come see!" Both sisters crowded close as Eliza opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter inside was short, written in the same firm script. "Miss Hale, your sisters wrote that you are plain, practical, and unlikely to marry locally. I appreciate the honesty. I'm a rancher in Wyoming Territory. I need a wife who can work, won't complain about the isolation, and understands this is a partnership, not a romance. If you're as practical as they claim, you'll understand the arrangement. I'm 34. My first wife died 4 years ago. The ranch is profitable, but remote. The work is hard. I won't lie about that. I need someone who can manage a household, handle accounts, and pull her weight. In return, you'll have a home, security, and respect as my wife. If you're interested, write back. If not, no harm done. Caleb Rourke." The letter was so blunt it took Eliza's breath away. Margaret snatched it from her hands. "He actually wants you. Oh, this is rich, Caroline. He's basically asking for a housekeeper who'll share his bed." "Let me see." Caroline read it over Margaret's shoulder. Her nose wrinkled. "Wyoming Territory? That's practically wilderness, and he sounds positively charming. Won't complain about the isolation. Eliza, he's probably a bear of a man living in a shack. Are you actually considering this?" Margaret's amusement had sharpened into something meaner. "You can't be serious." Eliza took the letter back. Her hands had stopped shaking. "I'm going to write him back," she said quietly. Both sisters stared. "You can't," Caroline said. "Eliza, we were joking. This was supposed to be funny, not— You can't actually go to Wyoming to marry some desperate rancher you've never met." "Why not?" Eliza met her sister's eyes. "You said yourself no one here wants me. At least he's being honest about what he needs." "Mother will never allow it," Margaret said sharply. "Mother doesn't care what I do as long as I'm not underfoot." Eliza folded the letter carefully. "You wanted me gone. Congratulations." She walked away before they could respond, their shocked silence following her up the stairs. Writing back was harder than she expected. Eliza sat at the small desk in her room, really just a crate with a board across it, and stared at the blank paper. What did you say to a man proposing marriage to someone he'd never seen, someone whose own sisters had advertised her like livestock? Finally, she wrote, "Mr. Rourke, my sisters told the truth. I'm plain and unlikely to marry here. I can manage a house, keep accounts, and work hard. I don't have romantic expectations. If you're offering an honest partnership, I'm interested. I should tell you they sent that first letter as a joke. They didn't expect anyone to respond. But your letter arrived, and I'm choosing to answer it myself. If you still want a wife after knowing that, I'll come to Wyoming. Eliza Hale." She posted it before she could lose her nerve. The response came faster than she expected, just 10 days. "Miss Hale, your sisters sound unpleasant. Good reason to leave. I'm enclosing train fare. Wire me when you're arriving in Cheyenne. I'll meet you there. The Reverend in Tall Pine can marry us the day you arrive, or you can wait if you want time to be sure. But understand the ranch is 2 days' ride from town. Once we're there, changing your mind means a long trip back. Come if you're certain. Don't come if you're not. C.R." Inside the envelope was enough money for a train ticket and then some. Eliza held the bills in her shaking hands and made her decision. Basit. Telling her family was exactly as awful as she'd expected. Her mother looked up from her needlework with vague surprise. "Wyoming? Whatever for?" "I'm getting married." That got her mother's full attention. "Married? To whom?" "A rancher. His name is Caleb Rourke." Margaret and Caroline exchanged glances. Neither had told their mother about the advertisement. "How did you meet this man?" her mother asked slowly. "Through correspondence." Eliza kept her voice level. "He needs a wife. I need a home. We've agreed to marry." "This is absurd." Her mother set down her needlework. "You can't marry a stranger and move to the frontier like some common— He sent train fare. I'm leaving Friday." The room went silent. Her father, who'd been reading the newspaper in the corner, finally looked up. "Wyoming territory?" "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment. Eliza had the sudden, uncomfortable realization that he was seeing her, really seeing her, for perhaps the first time in years. "You're certain about this?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Then I hope you find what you're looking for." It was the kindest thing he'd said to her in a decade. It made her throat tight. Her mother sputtered protests. Her sisters watched in stunned silence. But none of them tried very hard to stop her, and that told Eliza everything she needed to know about how little she'd be missed. Friday came too fast and not fast enough. Eliza packed her few possessions in a battered carpet bag, a few dresses, her mother's old Bible that no one wanted, the chipped plate from the kitchen that she'd claimed as her own. Everything she owned fit in one bag with room to spare. Margaret cornered her in the hallway. "You're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this." "Eliza, listen." For once, her sister's voice wasn't mocking. She actually sounded worried. "We were awful. I know we were awful, but you don't have to run away to the wilderness to prove something." "I'm not proving anything." Eliza closed the carpet bag. "I'm leaving. You'll be alone out there, with a man you've never met. What if he's cruel? What if he— Then I'll deal with it." Eliza met her sister's eyes. "At least he's honest about what he wants from me. That's more than anyone here ever gave me." Margaret flinched. Eliza didn't apologize. She picked up her bag and walked downstairs. Her father drove her to the station in silence. When they arrived, he handed her an envelope. A little extra, just in case. Inside was $50, more money than Eliza had ever held at once. "Papa, Your mother and I should have done better by you. He didn't meet her eyes. I hope this Rourke fellow deserves you. Wire if you need anything. He drove away before she could respond, leaving her standing on the platform with her carpetbag and a ticket west. The train arrived in a screech of brakes and hiss of steam. Eliza climbed aboard, found a seat by the window, and watched Missouri disappear behind her. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She just watched the landscape change from familiar farmland to rolling plains to something bigger and stranger and terrifying. The train was full of people heading west. Families, prospectors, soldiers, women traveling in groups with that bright, brittle determination that meant mail-order brides. Some of them tried to talk to Eliza. She kept her answers short. She wasn't interested in making friends with people who'd look at her with pity once they knew her story. On the second night, a woman in the seat across from her, thin, nervous, traveling with 3 children, leaned over and said quietly, "First time west?" "Yes." "Me too." The woman smiled tiredly. "Husband died last winter. His brother in Denver said he'd take us in. I hope he meant it." Eliza looked at the children sleeping against their mother. "I hope so too." "You traveling alone?" "Getting married in Cheyenne." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Mail order?" "Something like that." "Brave of you." She said it without judgment. "Or desperate. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." "Maybe both," Eliza admitted. The woman smiled. "Aren't we all?" Cheshit. Cheyenne appeared on the horizon on the 4th day, a sprawling, chaotic collection of buildings that looked nothing like the tidy Missouri towns Eliza knew. The streets were wide and muddy. Men on horseback rode past women in bonnets. Saloons stood next to churches. Everything smelled like horses and dust and something wild. Eliza stepped off the train with her carpetbag and looked around, heart hammering. She had no idea what Caleb Rourke looked like. He hadn't sent a photograph. For all she knew, he could be... "Miss Hale?" She turned. The man standing behind her was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from rough stone. Dark hair touched his collar. His eyes were gray and steady and completely unreadable. He wore a work shirt, canvas pants, and boots caked with mud. His hands were scarred. He looked strong and hard and nothing like the men back home. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who'd spent years working brutal land and expected nothing easy from life. "Mr. Rourke?" Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "That's right." His gaze swept over her once, quick, assessing, not lingering. "You look like your sisters described." It should have stung. Somehow, coming from him, it didn't. "Plain and practical?" she asked. "Honest." He picked up her carpetbag like it weighed nothing. "That's what matters." "You hungry?" "A little." "There's a place near here. We can talk before we see the Reverend, if you still want to go through with it." He said it matter-of-factly, like she might change her mind and he wouldn't blame her. Eliza followed him through the muddy streets to a small restaurant. He ordered coffee and stew for both of them without asking what she wanted. She should have been annoyed. Instead, she felt oddly relieved, one less decision to make. They sat across from each other in silence until the food arrived. Caleb drank his coffee black and didn't touch his stew. "You should know what you're getting into." "All right." "The ranch is remote. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles. Tall Pine is 20 miles south, but in winter you can go weeks without seeing anyone but me and the hands." "How many hands?" 3 year-round, 6 during busy season. He finally picked up his spoon. "They're good men, but they're rough. They'll respect you because you're my wife, but you'll have to earn anything beyond that." "I can do that." "House needs work." "My first wife..." He stopped, jaw tight. Started again. "She made it nice. I've let it go. You'll have your hands full getting it back in order." "That's fine." "The work's hard, cooking, cleaning, managing supplies, keeping accounts. If you're expecting leisure, you won't find it." "I've worked all my life, Mr. Rourke. I'm not afraid of that." He studied her across the table. "Why are you doing this?" "Honest answer." Eliza met his gaze. "Because my family didn't want me." "You're offering me something real, hard, but real. That's more than I had." "And if it's harder than you think? If you hate it?" "Then I'll hate it and keep working anyway." She surprised herself with how much she meant it. I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for mine. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. He pushed his stew toward her. Eat. It's a long ride to Tall Pine. Issa. They were married an hour later in a church that smelled like pine and candle wax. The Reverend was an old man with kind eyes, who asked twice if Eliza was certain. She said yes, both times. Caleb answered the vows in a steady voice and slipped a plain gold band on her finger. It was too big. Clearly, his first wife's ring. Eliza didn't care. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride," Caleb hesitated. Then he leaned down and pressed a brief, careful kiss to her forehead. It was oddly gentle for a man who looked like he'd forgotten how. They signed the papers. The Reverend wished them well. And just like that, Eliza Hale became Eliza Rourke. Outside, Caleb had a wagon waiting, rough-built but sturdy, pulled by two hardy horses. He helped her up onto the bench seat, his hands firm and impersonal, then climbed up beside her. 2 days to the ranch, he said, taking the reins. We'll camp tonight. That all right? Yes. He clicked to the horses, and they started moving, leaving Cheyenne behind. Eliza watched the town disappear. She was married. To a stranger. Heading into wilderness she'd never seen. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something like relief. They rode in silence for hours. The land opened up around them, vast rolling plains that stretched to horizons Eliza had never imagined. The sky was bigger here, bluer, endless. The wind smelled different, sharp and clean and wild. Everything was bigger, harder, more exposed than Missouri's gentle farmland. Eliza gripped the bench seat and tried not to feel overwhelmed. You all right? Caleb asked without looking at her. It's different than I expected. Different how? Bigger. She paused. Emptier. Gets worse the farther in we go. He said it without apology. Most women find it lonely. Did your first wife? His hands tightened on the reins. Eliza watched his jaw work. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Yes, he finally said. She hated it. Thought I'd take her somewhere civilized eventually. I never promised that, but she hoped anyway. What happened to her? She got sick, fever. By the time I got her to the doctor in Tall Pine, it was too late. His voice was flat, empty. She died blaming me for bringing her out here. She wasn't wrong. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. I won't make promises I can't keep, Caleb continued. The ranch is what it is. I'm what I am. If that's not enough, better to know now. And if I stay anyway? He glanced at her then, quick, assessing. Then we make it work. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't even kind, but it was honest, and somehow that was better. They made camp that night in a shallow valley with a creek running through it. Caleb unhitched the horses and set them to graze while Eliza gathered kindling. She'd never made a fire outdoors before, but she'd watched enough farmhands to know the basics. By the time Caleb returned, she had a small fire going. He stopped, surprised. You've done that before. No, but I've watched. She fed another stick to the flames. I learned fast. Good. He unpacked supplies from the wagon, bedrolls, a pot, coffee, beans. You'll need to. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire. The night came down huge and dark, full of stars Eliza had never seen through Missouri's trees. The silence was absolute. No neighbors, no voices, no familiar sounds. Just wind and fire and the distant howl of something wild. Eliza shivered. Cold? Caleb asked. A little. He handed her a blanket without comment. She wrapped it around her shoulders and watched the fire. After a while, Caleb said, You can sleep in the wagon. I'll take the ground. We're married. Doesn't mean you owe me anything yet. He said it simply. You've had a long few days. Sleep. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to prove she wasn't fragile or frightened, but exhaustion pulled at her bones. Thank you. She climbed into the wagon bed, wrapped herself in the blanket, and lay staring up at the stars through the canvas opening. Below, she heard Caleb settle by the fire. His breathing was steady and even. A man used to sleeping under open sky. Eliza closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her life would look like now. Tried to picture the ranch, the house, the work ahead. She couldn't. The future was as vast and unknowable as the Wyoming sky. But for the first time in years, it felt like hers. The second day was harder. The land grew rougher, hills rising into low mountains, the trail barely visible through scrub brush and rock. The wagon jolted over uneven ground. Eliza's back ached, her hands cramped from gripping the seat. Caleb drove with easy competence, guiding the horses around obstacles she wouldn't have seen. He pointed out landmarks, a lightning-split tree, a rock formation that looked like a broken tooth, a distant peak. "You'll need to know these," he said, "in case you ever need to find your way." To where? Tall Pine, or back to civilization. He said it without emotion. "I won't keep you prisoner, but the land will kill you if you don't know how to read it." It should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like respect, like he was treating her as someone capable of survival, not someone to be coddled. They stopped at midday to water the horses. Eliza climbed down stiffly, legs trembling. Caleb watched her struggle with the canteen, then took it and opened it for her without comment. "How much farther?" she asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. He handed back the canteen. "We'll get there before dark." "What's it like?" "The ranch." He considered the question. 400 acres, houses 2 stories, wood frame, barn, stable, bunkhouse for the hands, creek runs through the property, enough grazing for 50 head of cattle, more if we're careful. "Sounds big." "It is, and it's mine." Pride crept into his voice for the first time. "Every inch. Bought it with money I saved working other men's ranches for 10 years. No one gave me anything." Eliza understood that. "Good." He looked at her sharply. "You mean that?" "I do." She took another drink. "I don't want something I didn't earn either." His expression shifted, something like approval, maybe even the edge of respect. "You might do all right out here after all." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. But the ranch appeared just before sunset. Eliza saw it first as a cluster of buildings in a wide valley. House, barn, outbuildings all arranged around a central yard. Mountains rose behind it, purple in the fading light. The creek Caleb had mentioned curved along the eastern edge, catching the last rays of sun. It looked isolated, hard, beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. "There," Caleb said quietly. "That's home." 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached. They were rough-looking, bearded, weathered, dressed in work clothes. They stopped and stared when they saw Eliza. Caleb pulled the wagon to a halt. "This is my wife, Eliza. Eliza, that's Tom, Jake, and Sam. They run the place when I'm gone." The men nodded, clearly uncertain what to say. The one called Tom finally managed, "Ma'am?" "Gentlemen," Eliza said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Give her space to settle," Caleb told them. "She's had a long trip." He helped Eliza down, his hands careful again, impersonal, and grabbed her bag. "Come on, I'll show you the house." The house was bigger than Eliza expected. 2 stories with a wide porch and windows that would let in good light. But when Caleb opened the door, her breath caught. Inside was chaos. Dust covered every surface. Dishes were piled in the basin. The stove looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in months. The furniture was good quality but neglected. Cushions flat, wood unpolished. Upstairs, she could see doorways leading to what must be bedrooms. This was what Caleb had meant when he said his first wife had made it nice. This was what loss looked like. "I know it's bad," Caleb said roughly. "The hands keep the barn and the stock. I manage the business. The house, I just couldn't—" "It's fine," Eliza interrupted. She set down her bag. "I'll manage. You don't have to start tonight. Where's the lye soap?" He blinked. "What?" "Lye soap. For cleaning." She was already rolling up her sleeves. "And I'll need rags, a bucket, firewood for the stove. Do you have coffee?" "Eliza, this is mine now," she said firmly. "I might as well start treating it that way." For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb Rourke smiled. Brief, barely there, but real. "Lye soap's in the barn. I'll get it." He left, and Eliza stood alone in the dusty, neglected house that was now hers. She should have been overwhelmed. should have cried or panicked or regretted every choice that brought her here. Instead, she picked up a broom and started sweeping. By the time Caleb returned with soap and supplies, she'd cleared the kitchen floor and had water heating on the stove. He watched her work for a moment, then said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not running." Eliza looked at him, this hard, closed-off man who'd offered her honesty when everyone else had given her lies. "I'm not going to run. I made a choice. I'm keeping it." Something eased in his shoulders. "Then I'll help." They worked side by side until midnight, cleaning, organizing, making the kitchen habitable. Caleb carried water, scrubbed the stove, didn't complain. He moved around her with careful respect, never crowding, always asking before touching anything. When they finally stopped, the kitchen looked almost livable. Not perfect, but better. "That's enough for tonight," Caleb said. "You need sleep." Eliza's back ached. Her hands were raw. She was filthy and exhausted and more tired than she'd ever been. She also felt something like satisfaction. "Where am I sleeping?" she asked. Caleb gestured to the stairs. "Master bedroom's upstairs. I've been using the spare room. You can have the master." "We're married." "I know, but you just got here. Take time to—" "Caleb." She met his eyes. "We made an agreement. Partnership, not romance. I understand that. But I'm not afraid of sharing a room with my husband." His jaw worked. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "All right then." The master bedroom was as neglected as the rest of the house, but the bed was solid, and the quilts, though dusty, were well made. Eliza shook them out while Caleb lit a lamp. They stood on opposite sides of the bed, the lamplight flickering between them. "I won't touch you unless you want me to," Caleb said quietly. "That's a promise." "I know." Eliza sat down on the bed, suddenly aware of how strange this was. Married to a man she barely knew, sharing a room, starting a life that had no blueprint. "I trust you." "Why?" He sounded genuinely confused. "You don't know me." "You've been honest. That's more than most people manage." She met his eyes. "I'll take honest over pretty lies any day." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "Get some rest," he finally said. "Tomorrow starts early." Eliza lay down in her clothes, too tired to change. Caleb blew out the lamp and settled on the other side of the bed, staying carefully to his edge. The darkness was complete. The silence absolute except for the wind against the windows. Eliza closed her eyes and thought about the life she'd left. The sisters who'd mocked her, the family who'd barely noticed her absence, the future that had held nothing but more of the same. Then she thought about the house she'd started to reclaim, the man sleeping carefully beside her, the vast, hard land waiting outside. It wasn't what she'd imagined. It was real. And for the first time in her life, Eliza felt like she might actually belong somewhere. Eliza woke to the sound of boots on the porch and men's voices calling to each other in the pre-dawn dark. She opened her eyes to unfamiliar shadows, heart racing before she remembered. Wyoming, the ranch, Caleb. The bed beside her was empty, covers pulled tight. He'd risen without waking her. She dressed quickly in the dim light, fingers clumsy with the buttons. Her reflection in the dusty mirror showed a woman with tangled hair and wrinkled clothes who looked nothing like the careful, invisible girl from Missouri. She looked tired, uncertain, real. Downstairs, the kitchen was cold. No fire in the stove, no coffee brewing. Eliza found matches and kindling where Caleb had left them the night before and got the fire started on her third try. By the time the stove was hot enough, she'd located flour, salt, and lard in the pantry. The pantry itself was a disaster. Supplies thrown in haphazardly, nothing labeled, half-empty sacks spilling their contents. She'd need days just to organize it properly. She was elbow-deep in biscuit dough when the door opened. Caleb stopped short, surprise crossing his face. "You're up. Did you think I'd sleep all day?" Eliza shaped another biscuit and placed it in the pan. "Most women need time to adjust." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. His hair was wet. He'd washed at the pump outside. "First few days are hardest. I've had hard days before." She slid the pan into the oven. "Coffee's almost ready." He poured himself a cup and stood watching her work. It should have made her nervous. Instead, it felt oddly normal, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. The hands usually eat in the bunkhouse, Caleb said, but if you're cooking, they'll expect, how many? 3. Sometimes more if we've got day workers. Eliza looked at the biscuits in the oven, did quick math. I'll need more flour, and eggs if you have them. Chickens are out back, haven't been tended in a while. I'll manage. She wiped her hands on her skirt. Anything else I should know? Caleb's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You don't waste time, do you? Should I? No. He drank his coffee. The hands are good men, but they've been running wild without a woman around. They'll test you, see if you're soft. And if they find out I'm not, then they'll respect you, maybe. He set down his cup. Tom's the foreman. He's fair but stubborn. Jake's young, tries too hard. Sam doesn't talk much but notices everything. Don't let them treat you like you're fragile. They'll lose respect for that faster than anything. Eliza pulled the biscuits from the oven, golden, imperfect, but edible. I'll keep that in mind. She found a bell on a shelf and rang it hard. Within minutes, 3 men appeared in the doorway, boots scraped clean, hats in hands. They stared at the table she'd set, biscuits, butter, coffee. Tom spoke first. Ma'am, you didn't have to... Sit down and eat, Eliza said. And tomorrow, breakfast is at 6. Anyone who's late doesn't eat. Jake grinned. Sam's eyes flickered with something like approval. Tom pulled out a chair. They ate in silence at first, the men careful and awkward around her. Caleb watched the whole thing with that unreadable expression, saying nothing. Finally, Tom cleared his throat. Biscuits are good, ma'am. They're adequate, Eliza corrected. I'll do better tomorrow when I know where everything is. She's right, Caleb said. Pantry's a mess. I want it organized today. I can do that myself, Eliza said sharply. 4 sets of eyes turned to her. I'm capable of organizing supplies without supervision, she continued, meeting Caleb's gaze. Unless you think I'm not. Something shifted in his expression. I don't think that at all. I was offering help. Then say that. Don't give orders about my kitchen. The silence stretched tight. Jake looked between them like he was watching a horse about to bolt. Sam studied his coffee with sudden interest. Then Caleb nodded slowly. You're right. My apologies. Tom choked on his biscuit. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Eliza turned back to the stove, heart pounding. She'd just challenged her husband in front of his men on her first morning. It was either the smartest thing she'd ever done or the stupidest. Ma'am, Tom ventured after a moment, if you need anything moved or fixed, just holler. We're happy to help. Thank you, I will. The rest of breakfast passed without incident. The men finished eating, thanked her with awkward politeness, and fled back to their work. Caleb lingered, refilling his coffee. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said quietly. Which do you think? Brave. He met her eyes. But don't push too hard too fast. They're used to taking orders from me, not from a woman they just met. Then they'll have to get used to it. Eliza started clearing plates. You said this was a partnership. Partners don't take orders. They discuss. Fair enough. He drained his coffee. But out here, quick decisions keep people alive. Sometimes there's no time for discussion. Then I'll learn to make quick decisions too. He studied her for a long moment. I think you will. After he left, Eliza stood alone in the kitchen and let out a shaky breath. Her hands were trembling. She'd meant every word, but standing up to a man she'd known less than a day took more courage than she'd expected. The dirty dishes didn't care about her nerves. She washed them, banked the fire, and turned her attention to the pantry. It took her until noon to sort through the chaos. Flour, cornmeal, and oats went on the top shelf. Canned goods she organized by type. Spices, what few there were, got their own section. She found food that had gone bad months ago and threw it out. Made a list of what they needed, swept out mouse droppings and set traps. By the time she finished, sweat stuck her dress to her back and dust coated her arms. But the pantry was clean, organized, functional. She stood in the doorway and felt something like pride. The chickens were next. She found them in a coop behind the house, scrawny, neglected, pecking at bare ground. The coop itself was filthy, the nesting boxes empty. Eliza had never tended chickens before, but she'd watched the hired girl back home do it enough times. She cleaned the coop, spread fresh straw, scattered feed. The hens watched her with suspicious eyes, but didn't flee. She found 3 eggs, small, but fresh enough. Tomorrow there might be more if she kept at it. She was hauling water from the pump when Sam appeared, silent as smoke. He was older than the other hens, maybe 50, with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. "Need help with that?" he asked. "I can manage." "Didn't say you couldn't." He took the bucket anyway. "Just offering." They walked back to the house in silence. Sam set the bucket inside the door, tipped his hat, and turned to leave. "Sam?" He paused. "What happened to Caleb's first wife?" His face went still. "That's his story to tell, ma'am, not mine." He said she hated it here, that she died blaming him. Sam's jaw worked. She was a town girl. Came out here thinking she could change him, change the place. When she couldn't, it broke something in her. He met Eliza's eyes. Ranch is hard on people who fight it, easier on those who work with it. "I'm not here to change anything. I'm here to build something. Then you might last longer than she did." He said it without malice, just fact. "Boss needs someone who won't break. Hope you're it." He left before she could respond. Eliza spent the afternoon cleaning. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat dust from curtains until her arms ached. The house fought back. Years of neglect couldn't be undone in hours. But slowly, room by room, it started to look less like a tomb and more like a home. She found things as she worked. A woman's shawl in a trunk. Sheet music for songs Eliza didn't know. A photograph in a silver frame. Caleb, younger, standing beside a delicate woman with sad eyes. His first wife. The woman who'd hated this place enough to die bitter. Eliza set the photograph face down in the trunk and kept cleaning. By the time the sun started setting, she'd made real progress. The kitchen was spotless. The parlor was habitable. Upstairs, the master bedroom looked less abandoned. She was scrubbing the last of the grime from the bedroom windows when Caleb appeared in the doorway. He stopped, looking around at the transformation. "You've been busy." "I had time." Eliza wrung out her rag. "There's still a lot to do, but it's better." "It's more than better." He walked to the window she'd just cleaned, touched the glass like he couldn't quite believe it was clear. "I forgot it could look like this." The pain in his voice was sharp enough to cut. "I found her things," Eliza said quietly. "In the trunk. I can pack them away if you want." "No, leave them." He turned to face her. She was part of this place. Pretending she wasn't doesn't honor her. "Did you love her?" The question hung between them. "I tried to," Caleb said finally, "but she wanted someone I couldn't be, and I wanted someone who could be happy here. We were wrong for each other from the start." His face was hard. "She deserved better than what I gave her." "What did you give her?" "Honesty, hard work, a life that killed her." He looked away. "I won't make that mistake again." "What mistake? Being honest?" "Expecting someone to be happy with what I can offer." Eliza crossed the room to stand in front of him. "I'm not her. I don't want what she wanted. You told me what this life was, and I chose it anyway. Don't punish me for her unhappiness." His eyes met hers, gray and guarded and surprised. "I'm not—" "You are. You keep waiting for me to break or run or blame you. I'm not going to." She held his gaze. "I'm going to work. I'm going to build. And I'm going to stay. You need to decide if you can accept that." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Then Caleb nodded slowly. "All right. I'll try." "Good." Eliza picked up her bucket. "Now get out of my way. I still need to clean this floor." His laugh surprised them both, short, rough, but real. "Yes, ma'am." That night at dinner, the hands were less awkward. Tom asked about supplies. Jake volunteered to fix the chicken coop properly. Sam said nothing but nodded approval when Eliza served stew that was actually good. Caleb sat at the head of the table and watched it all with something like cautious hope. After the men left, Eliza and Caleb cleaned up together. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm. She washed, he dried, neither speaking much but comfortable in the silence. "You did well today," Caleb said as he put away the last plate. "I organized a pantry and cleaned some rooms. That's not exactly heroic. You stood your ground, with me, with the hands, with this place." He hung up the towel. "That takes strength." Eliza felt heat creep up her neck. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly what I need. Someone who sees what needs doing and does it. He paused. Thank you. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Upstairs, they prepared for bed with the same careful distance as the night before. Caleb turned his back while she changed into her nightdress. She did the same while he stripped to his undershirt and pants. They lay on opposite sides of the bed, the space between them deliberate. Eliza? Caleb's voice was quiet in the darkness. Yes? Why did you really come here? The truth. She thought about lying, making it sound noble or desperate or simple, but he'd given her honesty. She owed him the same. Because I was invisible. My whole life, I was the plain one, the burden, the daughter no one wanted. My sister sent that letter as a joke, but you answered like I was real, like I mattered. She stared at the ceiling. I came here because you saw me when no one else did, even if you only saw someone useful. The bed shifted. Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, rough, calloused, warm. I see more than that, he said quietly. I'm not good with words, and I won't promise things I can't give, but you're not invisible. Not here. Eliza squeezed his hand, throat tight. Thank you. They fell asleep like that, hands linked across the space between them. The next morning, Eliza woke to find Caleb already gone, but a fire crackling in the stove and coffee brewing. A note on the table read, "Riding fence today? Back late? Don't wait dinner." She smiled despite herself and got to work. The days fell into a pattern. Eliza rose before dawn, made breakfast for the hands, cleaned and organized the house room by room. She tended the chickens, learned to make bread that didn't turn out like rocks, figured out which supplies they were running low on. The hands slowly warmed to her. Tom started asking her opinion on meal schedules. Jake brought her fresh eggs without being asked. Sam taught her how to tell when meat had gone bad just by smell. Caleb came and went with the rhythm of ranch work, sometimes gone all day, sometimes appearing at odd hours, always tired, always checking to make sure she was managing. She was, more than managing. But the house was only part of it. Eliza needed to understand the ranch itself, the business, the accounts, the decisions that kept it running. That's what Caleb had promised. Partnership. On the fourth day, she cornered him in his office, a small room off the kitchen piled with ledgers, maps, and paperwork. "Show me the books," she said. Caleb looked up from a letter he was writing. "What?" "The account books. You said I'd handle accounts. I can't do that if I don't know what we have. You've been here less than a week. You don't need to—" "Yes, I do." She crossed her arms. "You're out working the ranch. I'm here. If something happens and you need me to make a decision about money or supplies, I need to know what we can afford." He studied her for a long moment, then pulled out a heavy ledger. "All right, sit down." For the next 2 hours, Caleb walked her through the ranch finances, income from cattle sales, costs for feed, equipment, wages, what they owed, what they were owed. It was more complex than Eliza expected, margins thin, risks high, everything dependent on weather and markets and a dozen things beyond their control. "We're not rich," Caleb said bluntly, "but we're stable, if we're careful." "What happens if we're not careful?" "We lose everything," he said it matter-of-factly. "That's ranching. One bad season, one wrong decision, and it's over." Eliza studied the numbers. "We could cut costs here." She pointed to a line item. "This feed supplier is charging more than the one in Tall Pine. Tall Pine supplier doesn't deliver. I'd have to haul it myself." "How much would that save over a year?" Caleb did the math. His eyebrows rose. "Enough to matter. Then we haul it ourselves." She turned the page. "What about this? You're paying 2 different farriers. One shoes the workhorses, one does the saddle horses. Why can't one person do both?" "Because—" Stopped. "I don't know. That's how we've always done it. Maybe it's time to do it differently." They spent another hour going through the books, Eliza asking questions, Caleb answering with increasing respect in his voice. By the end, they'd found 3 ways to cut costs and 2 opportunities to increase income. "You're good at this," Caleb said, sounding surprised. "I kept house accounts back home. My father's business records when he was too drunk to do it himself." She closed the ledger. "Numbers make sense. They don't lie or mock you. They just are." "Will you keep doing this? The books?" "That's why I'm here, isn't it? To be useful. That's not... He stopped, frustrated. You're more than useful, Eliza. You're smart, capable. I should have said that before. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you. I mean it. He stood, gathering papers. I need to ride out to the north pasture, check on the new calves. Want to come? Eliza hesitated. She had laundry to finish, bread to bake, floors to scrub. The house will still be here when we get back, Caleb said, reading her expression. Come see the ranch. You should know what we're working for. She untied her apron. All right. They rode out on two of the saddle horses. Eliza on a gentle mare named Bess, Caleb on a big gelding that danced sideways and fought the bit. She hadn't ridden much, but Bess was patient with her fumbling. The land opened up around them. Miles of rolling grass, distant mountains, sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wind smelled like sage and sun-warmed earth. This is all ours? Eliza asked. 400 acres. Not the biggest spread, but it's good land. Pride colored Caleb's voice. Water, grazing, shelter from the worst weather. I chose it carefully. They rode to the north pasture where cattle grazed, 30 or so head with new calves wobbling beside their mothers. Caleb dismounted and walked among them, checking each calf with practiced efficiency. Eliza watched him work. He was different out here, more relaxed, more himself. The hard edges softened. He spoke to the animals in a low voice, touched them with surprising gentleness. This is what you love, she said when he returned. This is what I am. He swung back into the saddle. Everything else, the business, the accounts, dealing with town, I do it because I have to. But this? He gestured at the land. This is why I'm here. They rode back slowly, the horses walking side by side. Caleb pointed out landmarks, told her about the land's history, explained his plans for expansion. Eliza listened and began to understand. This wasn't just a ranch to him. It was proof. Proof that a man with nothing could build something lasting. Proof that hard work and stubbornness could win against impossible odds. It was exactly what she needed it to be. Back at the house, she made dinner while Caleb tended the horses. The hands came in tired and hungry. Tom had a cut on his arm that needed cleaning. Jake had stepped in a gopher hole and twisted his ankle. Sam's back was bothering him again. Eliza tended them all without fuss, bandaging, advising rest, handing out liniment like she'd been doing it for years. You're like a mother hen, Jake said, grinning through his pain. And you're like a foolish chick who doesn't watch where he steps, Eliza shot back. The men laughed. Even Sam cracked a smile. After dinner, Caleb helped her clean up again. They worked in comfortable silence until Caleb said, They respect you. Maybe. Or they're just being polite. No, they respect you. I can tell. He dried a plate carefully. That's rare out here. Most women who come west, the men either coddle them or ignore them. But they see you as capable. That matters. Good. Eliza handed him another plate. I'd rather have respect than pity any day. You'll have both before long. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Town's going to talk. Mail order bride, sudden marriage, woman no one knows. He set down the plate. They'll judge you, especially the women. You need to be ready for that. Let them talk. I've been judged my whole life. At least here, I have you backing me up. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe gratitude. You do, always. That night, they went to bed with less space between them. Not touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Eliza lay awake listening to Caleb breathe and thought about how strange her life had become. A week ago, she'd been nobody in Missouri. Now she was a rancher's wife in Wyoming, managing a household, earning respect from hardened men, learning to write and read ledgers and stand her ground. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. But it was hers. And that made all the difference. The trip to Tall Pine came 3 weeks after Eliza arrived at the ranch. Caleb announced it over breakfast, his voice casual but his eyes watching her carefully. We need supplies, and people need to meet you properly. Eliza's stomach tightened. She'd been dreading this. The scrutiny, the questions, the women who'd look at her and see exactly what her sisters had seen. Plain, desperate, not quite good enough. When? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Tomorrow. We'll stay overnight at the hotel, head back the next morning. He paused. Unless you'd rather wait. No, better to get it over with. Tom looked up from his eggs. Want me to come along, boss? In case there's trouble? What kind of trouble? Eliza asked. The three men exchanged glances. Finally, Sam spoke, his voice dry. Henry Blackwell kind of trouble. Who's Henry Blackwell? Caleb's jaw tightened. Owns the biggest spread in the territory. Thinks that means he owns everything else too. He stood, grabbing his hat. We'll be fine. He knows better than to start something in town. But the tension in his shoulders said otherwise. They left before dawn the next morning, the wagon loaded with empty crates to fill with supplies. The ride to Tall Pine took most of the day, the road rough and rutted from spring rains. Eliza wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and tried not to think about what waited at the other end. Caleb was quiet, focused on driving, but halfway there he said, They're going to stare, ask questions. Some of them won't be kind about it. I know. And they'll have heard about the mail order arrangement. News travels fast out here. Let them talk. Eliza adjusted her bonnet. I've survived worse than gossip. Have you? She thought about her sister's laughter, her mother's indifference, all those years of being invisible. Yes, he glanced at her, something like approval in his eyes. Good. Because once we're in town, you're not just my wife, you're a rancher's wife. That means something out here. Don't let anyone make you forget it. Tall Pine appeared just before sunset. A collection of wooden buildings sprawled along a single main street. It was bigger than Eliza expected, but still small enough that everyone would know everyone's business by morning. Caleb drove straight to the general store, a 2-story building with Morrison's Mercantile painted across the front. He helped Eliza down from the wagon, his hand firm on her elbow. Let me do the talking at first, he said quietly. Morrison's a gossip, but he's fair. Don't let him rattle you. They walked in together. The store was crowded, shelves packed with goods, barrels of flour and sugar, tools hanging from the ceiling. 3 women stood at the counter, their conversation stopping dead when Eliza entered. A portly man behind the counter looked up, his face breaking into a practiced smile. Caleb Rourke, haven't seen you in a month. Wondered if you'd frozen to death out there. Still breathing, Morrison. Caleb's hand stayed on Eliza's back. This is my wife, Eliza. The silence was deafening, every eye in the store fixed on her. Morrison recovered first. Well now, congratulations are in order. When did this happen? 3 weeks ago, in Cheyenne. Cheyenne, my. Morrison's eyes swept over Eliza, taking in every detail. Welcome to Tall Pine, Mrs. Rourke. We're glad to have you. The words were polite, but his tone said he was cataloging her for later discussion. Plain dress, no jewelry, rough hands. He'd have her whole story figured out by dinner. Thank you, Eliza said, meeting his gaze. I'll need supplies, quite a lot actually. Your inventory needs updating. Morrison blinked. I beg your pardon? Your inventory. Eliza walked to the nearest shelf, running her finger along a row of canned goods. These are arranged by size, not by type. Makes it harder for customers to find what they need. And you're out of several basics. Lye soap, lamp oil, decent thread. The 3 women at the counter stared. Caleb's mouth twitched. Morrison's smile faltered. Well, we do our best, Mrs. Rourke, but supply lines out here are difficult. I understand. Eliza pulled out the list she'd made. Here's what I need, and I'll expect a fair price, not the inflated rates you charge people who don't know better. Morrison's face went red. One of the women coughed to cover a laugh. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the whole thing with barely concealed amusement. Now see here, Morrison blustered. I run an honest business. I'm sure you do, which is why you'll give me an honest price. Eliza smiled sweetly. My husband says you're fair. I'd hate to find out he was wrong. Morrison looked at Caleb, who just shrugged. She keeps the books now. I don't argue with her about money anymore. Learned that lesson fast. The shopkeeper deflated. Fine. Let me tally this up. While Morrison worked, the 3 women approached. The eldest was thin and sharp-eyed, dressed in expensive fabric that looked out of place in frontier Wyoming. She looked Eliza up and down with open disdain. So you're the mail-order bride everyone's talking about. Eliza kept her expression neutral. I'm Caleb's wife. That's all that matters. How modern of you. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm Constance Blackwell. My husband Henry owns the Double B Ranch. Perhaps you've heard of it? So this was Blackwell's wife. Eliza understood the challenge immediately. I've heard the name, she said evenly. Henry was quite surprised to hear Caleb had married so suddenly. After his first wife's unfortunate passing, we all thought, well, Constance's smile sharpened, but I'm sure you'll do fine. Managing a household is women's work after all, nothing too complicated. The other two women shifted uncomfortably. Caleb's eyes narrowed, but Eliza spoke before he could. You're right. Managing a household isn't complicated. But managing a ranch, the accounts, the contracts, the business decisions, that takes real skill. She met Constance's gaze. I handle both. Does your husband let you touch his ledgers, Mrs. Blackwell? Constance's face went stiff. That's hardly appropriate. Then perhaps you shouldn't comment on what's appropriate for me. The silence was sharp enough to cut. One of the other women, younger, with kind eyes, suddenly smiled. I like her, she said to Caleb. She's got spine. That she does. Caleb moved to stand beside Eliza. Mrs. Blackwell, always a pleasure. Ladies. He tipped his hat and guided Eliza toward the door. Morrison's protests about the order following them out. On the street, Eliza's hands were shaking. She'd just made an enemy of the most powerful woman in town on her first day. It was either brilliant or disastrous, and she wasn't sure which. Well, Caleb said slowly, that was something. I shouldn't have. No, you should have. He looked at her with undisguised respect. Constance Blackwell has been running this town through fear and gossip for 5 years. Someone needed to stand up to her. I'm glad it was you. She'll make my life difficult now. She'll try. Won't work, though. He took her arm. Come on. Let's get dinner and find the hotel. You've earned a real bed tonight. The hotel dining room was crowded with ranchers, merchants, and their families. Eliza felt every eye on her as they entered. The whispers followed them to their table. Ignore them, Caleb muttered, pulling out her chair. Hard to ignore when they're not even trying to be quiet. They'll get bored eventually. But his face was tight, his shoulders tense. Dinner was beef stew and bread that was better than Eliza's, but not by much. They ate in relative silence while the dining room buzzed around them. Eliza caught fragments of conversation. Mail order. Desperate. Poor Caleb. She kept her head up and her expression calm, even as her stomach churned. Halfway through the meal, a man approached their table. He was tall, well-dressed, with silver at his temples and cold blue eyes. He smiled like a snake. Caleb? Heard you got yourself hitched. Caleb didn't stand. Blackwell. So this was Henry Blackwell. Eliza studied him carefully. He had the look of a man who'd never been told no, confident to the point of arrogance, used to getting his way. Congratulations are in order, I suppose. Blackwell's eyes slid to Eliza. Though I have to say, it's quite sudden after all these years of you swearing off marriage. Didn't swear off anything, just waited for the right person. Mail order, though? That's a bit... He paused, pretending to search for the word. Desperate, isn't it? Caleb's hand tightened on his fork. Eliza spoke before he could. Not desperate, Mr. Blackwell. Practical. Caleb needed a capable partner. I needed a new start. We both got what we wanted. She smiled. Not everyone requires romance to make a good match. Blackwell's smile froze. I see. Well, as long as you're happy. We are, Caleb said flatly. Now, if you'll excuse us. Blackwell's eyes hardened. Of course. Enjoy your dinner. He started to turn, then paused. Oh, Caleb, I've been meaning to discuss that water access issue. The creek that runs through your property? My cattle have been using it for years. Wouldn't want there to be any misunderstanding about rights. No misunderstanding. It's my land, my water. Caleb's voice was steel. Your cattle can drink elsewhere. Now, Caleb, let's be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You want water? Drill a well. Stay off my property. Blackwell's pleasant mask slipped. You're making a mistake. The only mistake would be letting you walk over me. Caleb stood, matching Blackwell's height. We done here? For a moment, Eliza thought Blackwell might swing. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. Then he forced a smile. For now, but we'll talk again soon. He nodded curtly to Eliza. Mrs. Rourke. He walked away, and the entire dining room seemed to exhale. Caleb sat back down, his face dark. That's the trouble I meant. What does he want? Everything I have. Land, water, cattle. He's been trying to buy me out for 3 years. When I wouldn't sell, he started making it difficult, blocking my access to markets, spreading rumors, cutting fences. Caleb's knuckles were white. He won't stop until he owns the whole valley, or I'm broke. Then we won't let him win. He looked at her, surprised. This isn't your fight. I'm your wife. That makes it my fight. Eliza leaned forward. What's his weakness? What? Every man has one. What's his? Caleb thought for a moment. Pride. And his wife. Constance runs him more than he'd ever admit. Then we use that. Eliza's mind was already working. She doesn't like me. Good. That means she'll be watching me, waiting for me to fail. When I don't, it'll eat at her. And when she's angry, she'll make mistakes. You're talking about starting a war with the most powerful couple in the territory. They started it. I'm just refusing to lose. She met his eyes. You brought me here to be a partner. Let me be one. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. All right, but we do this smart. No reckless moves. Agreed. They finished dinner and retired to their hotel room, a simple space with a bed, a washstand, and not much else. It was the first time they'd slept anywhere but the ranch, and the unfamiliarity made everything feel different. Eliza changed behind a screen while Caleb stared out the window at the dark street below. I'm sorry, he said quietly, about how they treated you today. I expected it. Doesn't make it right. He turned to face her. You handled yourself well, better than I did. You handled Blackwell fine. I wanted to hit him. That's not handling it well. Eliza smiled. But you didn't. That's what matters. They climbed into bed, the mattress unfamiliar and too soft after weeks on the ranch. They lay in the darkness, neither sleeping. Eliza? Yes? Thank you for standing with me today, for not backing down. Where else would I stand? She turned to look at him, his face barely visible in the dim light. I told you I wasn't going to run. I meant it. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I'm starting to believe that. They fell asleep holding hands, and for the first time since they'd married, the space between them felt like choice rather than caution. The next morning brought more trouble. They were loading supplies into the wagon when Morrison came running out of the store, face red and agitated. Caleb, there's been an accident. One of your hands, Tom, I think. He's at the doctor's. Got trampled yesterday evening. Eliza's heart dropped. Caleb went pale. How bad? Bad enough they sent for you. Doc says you should come quick. They abandoned the wagon and ran to the doctor's office, a small building at the end of a main street. Inside, the doctor, a tired-looking man with spectacles, met them at the door. He's alive, but it's serious, broken ribs, possible internal bleeding. He needs rest and care. Can't be moved for at least a week. What happened? Caleb demanded. Your other hand, Jake, said a horse spooked. Tom tried to calm it, got thrown and trampled. Pure accident. Caleb pushed past the doctor into the back room. Tom lay on a narrow bed, his face gray with pain, his breathing shallow. His chest was wrapped in bandages, and one arm was splinted. Boss, Tom croaked. Sorry. Don't talk. Caleb's voice was rough. Just rest. You're going to be fine. But his eyes said he wasn't sure of that at all. Outside, Eliza found the doctor. What does he need? What can we do? Rest, mostly. Someone to watch him, make sure the bleeding doesn't worsen, change bandages, keep him comfortable. The doctor rubbed his eyes. I can keep him here, but I've got 3 other patients and no help. If you've got someone who can tend him, I can, Eliza said immediately. Both men looked at her. I've nursed sick family before. I can change bandages, watch for fever, make sure he rests. She turned to Caleb. Go back to the ranch. Make sure Jake and Sam are all right. I'll stay here with Tom. Eliza, you can't. Yes, I can. The ranch needs you. Tom needs me. She squeezed his arm. We're partners, remember? This is part of it. Caleb looked torn. Finally, he nodded. All right. But if anything changes, anything, you send word immediately. I will. He left reluctantly, and Eliza turned to the doctor. Show me what to do. For the next week, Eliza barely left Tom's side. She changed his bandages, spooned broth into him when he could eat, sat with him through the nights when pain kept him awake. The doctor taught her to watch for signs of infection, how to tell if internal bleeding was worsening. Tom was a terrible patient, gruff, embarrassed, trying to downplay his pain. Eliza ignored his protests and did what needed doing. You don't have to do this, he muttered on the third day. Boss could hire someone. Be quiet and drink your broth. I'm fine. You have 3 broken ribs and almost died. You're not fine. Now drink. He drank, grumbling the whole time. On the 4th day, Constance Blackwell visited. She swept into the doctor's office like she owned it, took one look at Eliza sitting beside Tom's bed, and raised her eyebrows. How domestic, playing nurse to the hired help. Eliza didn't stand. Tom works for my husband. That makes him my responsibility. How noble! Constance's smile was sharp. Though I have to wonder, is this really about duty, or are you just desperate to prove your worth? I don't need to prove anything to you, Mrs. Blackwell. Don't you? Everyone's wondering, you know, why Caleb really married you. Some think it's desperation. Others think... She paused delicately. Well, that he needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. Eliza stood slowly, meeting Constance's eyes. Let them wonder. My marriage is none of their business, or yours. Everything in this town is my business. Then you must lead a very sad life. Eliza crossed her arms. Was there something you actually wanted? Or did you just come to be unpleasant? Constance's face flushed. You're making enemies, Mrs. Rourke. That's unwise in a place like this. I'd rather have enemies who are honest about it than friends who smile while stabbing me in the back. Eliza gestured to the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Constance left in a fury. Tom, who'd been pretending to sleep, cracked one eye open. You just made that worse, ma'am. Probably, but it felt good. He laughed, then winced. You're all right, Mrs. Rourke. Boss chose well. On the 5th day, Caleb returned with Jake and Sam. They'd brought fresh supplies, news from the ranch, and barely concealed relief that Tom was still alive. He's doing better, Eliza reported. Doctor says another week of rest, then he can travel if he's careful. Caleb pulled her aside. You look exhausted. I'm fine. Eliza, I said I'm fine. But her voice cracked slightly. She was exhausted, bone-tired from days of worry and sleepless nights. Caleb studied her face, then made a decision. Jake. Sam. You two stay here with Tom. Eliza and I are going to the hotel. She needs rest. The doctor can manage for one night. Come on. He practically dragged her to the hotel, got a room, and ordered her to sleep. Eliza wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. She collapsed onto the bed and was asleep before Caleb finished taking off his boots. She woke hours later to find him sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching her. How long was I asleep? Her voice was rough. 6 hours. It's almost midnight. I should get back, but... No. He moved to sit on the edge of the bed. Tom's fine. Jake's with him. You needed rest. Eliza sat up, pushing hair out of her face. I'm supposed to be taking care of him. And who's taking care of you? Caleb's voice was gentle. You've been running yourself into the ground for a week. Someone needs to make you stop. I'm not fragile. I know. But you're also not invincible. He took her hand. You've proven yourself, Eliza. To me, to the hands, to this whole damn town. You don't have to keep fighting every second to show you belong. The words hit harder than she expected. Her throat tightened. I don't know how to stop. Then let me help you learn. He squeezed her hand. We're partners. That means I take care of you too. Eliza looked at their joined hands, his rough and scarred, hers raw from work. I'm not used to that. Neither am I, but we'll figure it out. He smiled slightly. We're both stubborn enough. She laughed despite herself. That's true. They sat in silence for a while, the night quiet around them. Finally, Caleb said, I heard about what you said to Constance Blackwell. Eliza winced. News travels fast. Always does. For what it's worth, half the town is terrified of you now. The other half wants to buy you a drink. Which half are you in? The half that's glad you're on my side. He stood, pulling her to her feet. Come on, let's get some real food in you. They ate a late dinner in the empty hotel dining room, steak, potatoes, bread. Eliza was hungrier than she'd realized. Caleb watched her eat with quiet satisfaction. When we get Tom back to the ranch, he said, I want you to take a few days, rest. Don't clean, don't cook, don't work yourself to death. The house will survive. You're more important than a clean floor. Eliza set down her fork. You really mean that? I do. He met her eyes. You're not just useful to me, Eliza. He stopped, searching for words. You matter as a person, not just as a wife or a worker or anything else. You matter. The words settled into her chest, warm and unexpected. No one had ever said that to her before. Not her family, not anyone. Thank you, she whispered. He reached across the table, took her hand. I'm not good at this, saying what I mean, but I'm trying. I know, me too. They finished dinner and walked back upstairs. The hotel room felt different now, less unfamiliar, more like a space they shared. They prepared for bed in comfortable silence. When they lay down, Caleb pulled her close. Not demanding, just offering. Eliza hesitated, then settled against his chest, his arm around her shoulders. It felt right. Safe. Real. Eliza? His voice rumbled through his chest. I'm glad you came here. Glad you stayed. She smiled against his shirt. Me too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, the careful distance between them finally truly gone. The next morning brought a storm rolling in from the mountains, dark clouds and wind that rattled the windows. The doctor declared Tom fit enough to travel if they were careful, and they loaded him into the wagon with blankets and pillows. The ride back to the ranch was slow and tense. Tom gritted his teeth against the pain. Eliza sat beside him, steadying him when the wagon jolted. Caleb drove with fierce concentration, trying to avoid the worst ruts. By the time they reached the ranch, the first snowflakes were falling. Storm's coming early, Sam said, helping carry Tom to the bunkhouse. Big one by the look of it. Caleb's face was grim. Get the stock secured. Everything that can blow away needs to be tied down. We've got maybe 6 hours before it hits. The next hours were chaos. Eliza helped where she could, securing shutters, bringing supplies from the barn, making sure the house was ready. The hands worked frantically, driving cattle to shelter, reinforcing fences, battening down everything loose. The wind picked up, howling across the valley. The temperature dropped. And as the sun set, the storm hit with a fury that took Eliza's breath away. Snow fell in blinding sheets. Wind screamed around the house. The world disappeared into white chaos. They were trapped, all of them, together. And the storm was only beginning. The storm hit like a living thing, violent and relentless and utterly without mercy. Snow didn't fall so much as attack, driven horizontal by wind that screamed around the corners of the house. Within an hour, drifts were piling against the walls. Within 2, the world had vanished completely into white chaos. Caleb stood at the window, his face tight with worry. Can't see the barn. Can't see anything. Eliza fed more wood into the stove, trying to keep the kitchen warm. The house groaned under the wind's assault, timbers creaking like a ship in rough seas. The hands made it to the bunkhouse? Should have. Sam knows better than to get caught out in this. But his voice carried doubt. The temperature inside was dropping despite the fire. Eliza could see her breath when she moved away from the stove. She pulled extra blankets from the upstairs closet, hung them over the windows to block drafts, stuffed rags under the doors. By nightfall, the storm had intensified. The wind sounded like something dying. Snow found every crack, every gap, forming small drifts inside the house along the windowsills. The lanterns flickered. The cold pressed in from all sides. This is bad, Caleb said quietly. Worse than I've seen in 5 years. How long will it last? Could be a day. Could be 3. He moved away from the window, his shoulders tense. We've got food and firewood. But if something happens to the animals, if the roof on the barn collapses, don't borrow trouble. Eliza handed him coffee, though her own hands were shaking. We deal with what's in front of us. He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. You're not scared. I'm terrified, but panicking won't help. She met his eyes. So I'm choosing not to. Something in his expression cracked. How do you do that? Stay calm when everything's falling apart? Practice. She smiled without humor. I've had a lot of practice. They ate a cold dinner, bread and cheese, nothing that required letting the fire die down to cook. The house shuddered under a particularly violent gust. Somewhere outside, something metal tore loose and went clattering into the darkness. I should check the bunkhouse, Caleb said, standing. Make sure the hands are... You'll die trying to cross that distance in this. Eliza grabbed his arm. You can't see 3 feet. You'll get lost and freeze before you make it halfway. They might need... And you're no good to them dead. Her grip tightened. Sam knows what to do. Tom's with them. They'll manage until morning. Caleb's jaw worked. He hated this. Hated being trapped, helpless, unable to protect what was his. But finally, he nodded. You're right. I usually am. She tried to lighten the moment. You should get used to that. He almost smiled. Almost. The night stretched long and brutal. They stayed in the kitchen, feeding the fire, trying to stay warm. Upstairs would be freezing, better to keep close to the heat. Eliza made a pallet of blankets on the floor near the stove. They sat side by side, shoulders touching, watching the fire. Tell me about Missouri, Caleb said after a while. What was it like? Green, soft, easy compared to this. Eliza pulled a blanket tighter around her shoulders. Everything was smaller there. The sky, the spaces between people. You couldn't breathe without everyone knowing about it. Sounds suffocating. It was. But it was also safe. Predictable. She paused. This place, it's the opposite of safe. But I can breathe here. Even now? In this? Especially now. She looked at him. Out here, the danger's honest. A storm doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It just is. People back home, they smiled while they destroyed you. I'll take an honest storm any day. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. My first wife hated the honesty. She wanted things softened, made pretty. When I couldn't do that, when I couldn't lie to her about what this life was, he stopped, his voice rough. She stopped looking at me, started looking past me, through me, like I'd failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. What was her name? Sarah. The name came out careful, like it hurt. She was beautiful. Town girl, daughter of a merchant. She married me thinking I'd give up ranching eventually, move somewhere civilized. I never promised that, but she heard what she wanted to hear. How did she die? Fever took her fast. 3 days, start to finish. His hands clenched. She was sick for 2 days before she even told me. By the time I got her to the doctor, it was too late. She died angry. Angry at me for bringing her here. Angry at herself for coming. Angry at everything. That's not your fault, isn't it? I knew she was unhappy. I just thought if I worked harder, made the ranch more successful, she'd come around. Instead, I worked so much I barely saw her, left her alone in this house for days at a time. His voice cracked. She died alone because I wasn't here. Because I chose the ranch over her. Eliza turned to face him fully. Did she ever ask you to stay? What? Did she ever tell you she needed you here more? That she was lonely, scared, sick? Caleb's brow furrowed. No, she'd make comments. Little digs about how I cared more about the cattle than her. I thought she was just complaining. She probably was, but that's not the same as asking for what she needed. Eliza took his hand. You can't fix a problem someone won't tell you about, and you can't blame yourself for not reading her mind. She was my wife, and she was an adult who could use her words. If she was unhappy, really unhappy, she should have said so clearly, not in hints and complaints. Eliza's voice was firm. I'm not saying you were perfect, but you can't carry all the blame for a marriage that took 2 people to break. He stared at their joined hands. You're the first person who's ever said that to me, because everyone else was too busy judging you to see the truth. She squeezed his fingers. You did your best with what you knew. That's all anyone can do. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Inside, something shifted between them, a wall coming down, a door opening. I was afraid, Caleb said quietly. When I sent for you, afraid I'd make the same mistakes, hurt someone else, fail again. And now? Now I think maybe the mistake was trying to be someone I'm not. He looked at her, his eyes raw and honest. Sarah needed soft words and pretty lies. You need the truth, even when it's hard. I can give you that. I know you can. You already have. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm not her, Caleb. I'm not going to punish you for being who you are. His arm came around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling, the storm raging, the cold pressing in from all sides. Eliza? I'm glad it was you who answered that letter. She smiled against his shoulder. Me too. Somewhere past midnight, exhaustion won. They lay down on the pallet together, wrapped in blankets, pressed close for warmth. The temperature had dropped so low that ice was forming on the inside of the windows. But between them, there was heat. Safety. Something that felt dangerously close to love. Eliza fell asleep listening to Caleb's heartbeat and the storm's fury, and for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt truly home. She woke to silence. The sudden absence of wind was so complete it felt wrong. Eliza sat up, disoriented. Gray light filtered through the blanket-covered windows. The fire had burned down to embers. And Caleb was gone. Panic spiked through her. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the cold that bit through her clothes. Caleb? No answer. She ran to the door, yanked it open, and stopped dead. The world was buried. Snow had piled against the door in a drift taller than she was, spilling into the house in a frozen wave. Beyond it, everything was white and still and alien. The barn was barely visible through the glare. The bunkhouse had vanished completely under snow. And standing in the middle of it all, knee-deep in a drift, was Caleb. He was digging toward the bunkhouse with a shovel, his movements frantic. Caleb! Eliza grabbed her coat and fought through the snow to reach him. What are you doing? Can't see smoke from the bunkhouse chimney. His voice was tight with fear. They should have a fire going. Something's wrong. Eliza looked. He was right. No smoke. And the door to the bunkhouse was completely buried under snow. How long have you been digging? Half an hour, maybe more. I can't... He stopped, breathing hard. I can't reach them fast enough. Then we do it together. Eliza grabbed the second shovel from where it leaned against the house. Show me where to dig. They worked side by side, attacking the snow with desperate efficiency. It was heavy, wet, packing down as fast as they moved it. Eliza's arms burned. Sweat soaked through her clothes despite the cold. But they kept digging. It took an hour to reach the bunkhouse door. Caleb yanked it open and plunged inside, Eliza right behind him. The room was freezing. The fire had gone out, no wood left to burn. And huddled in the corner under every blanket they could find were Jake, Sam, and Tom. They were alive. Barely. Couldn't get out, Sam said through chattering teeth. Door was blocked. Wood ran out around midnight. Tom looked gray, his injured ribs clearly causing agony in the cold. Jake was shivering so hard he couldn't speak. Get them to the house, Caleb ordered. Now! They half carried, half dragged the three men through the snow to the main house. Eliza got the fire roaring while Caleb stripped them of wet clothes and wrapped them in dry blankets. She made hot coffee, forced them to drink it despite their protests. Stupid, Tom kept muttering. Should have rationed the wood better. You didn't know the storm would last this long, Eliza said firmly. None of us did. Now drink and get warm. It took hours for the men to stop shaking. Tom's breathing was ragged. The cold had made his injuries worse. Jake had frostbite on his fingers. Sam had a cut on his head from where falling ice had hit him. Eliza tended them all while Caleb went back out to check on the animals. He returned an hour later, his face grim. Lost 3 cattle. They got separated from the herd, froze in a ravine. His voice was flat, empty. Could have been worse. The barn held. Most of the stock made it. 3 head isn't the end of the world, Sam said quietly. Could lose 30 in a storm like that. Still lost them. Caleb stripped off his wet coat. Still my failure. It's winter, Eliza said sharply. Animals die in winter. That's not failure. That's reality. He looked at her with haunted eyes. I should have… What? Controlled the weather? Stopped the storm? She crossed to stand in front of him. You did everything right. You got everyone safe. You protected what you could. The rest is it's just the cost of living out here. She's right, boss, Jake said, his voice still shaky. You saved our lives today. 3 cows don't measure against that. Caleb's shoulders sagged. For a moment, Eliza thought he might break. Then he straightened, took a breath, and nodded. All right, let's focus on what's next. The next hours were organized chaos. The men needed rest, but the ranch needed work. Snow had to be cleared, animals checked, damage assessed. They worked in shifts, some resting, while others dug out pathways, reinforced weakened structures, made sure nothing else had been destroyed. Eliza kept the house running, food cooking, coffee brewing, wet clothes drying, injuries tended. She moved from task to task without stopping, driven by necessity and the knowledge that if she slowed down, exhaustion would take her. By evening, they'd made progress. The immediate dangers were handled. The men were recovering. The ranch was battered but standing. Caleb found Eliza in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her eyes closed. You should rest. So should you. I will. After… He stopped. There is no after, is there? There's always something else. Welcome to ranching. She opened her eyes. Or so I'm told. He smiled, tired but genuine. You handled today well. Better than I did. You kept 3 men from freezing to death. I made coffee, hardly the same thing. You kept me from falling apart. That counts for something. He took her hand. Thank you. The simple gratitude hit her harder than she expected. We're partners. That's what partners do. Is it? He pulled her closer. I'm not sure anymore what we are. What do you mean? He stopped, searching for words. This started as an arrangement, practical, businesslike. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like that. Eliza's heart was pounding. And now? Now it feels like more. His thumb traced circles on her hand. It feels real, like something I don't want to lose. You won't lose it. She met his eyes. You won't lose me. How can you be sure? Because I choose to stay. Every day I choose this. Choose you. Choose us. She reached up to touch his face. That's not going to change. He kissed her then, not the careful, distant kiss from their wedding, but something deep and desperate and real. His hands came up to frame her face. She pressed closer, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I didn't plan to. Didn't think I could again, but I do. The words settled into Eliza's chest, warm and precious and terrifying. I love you too. They stood there holding each other while the house creaked around them and the men slept in the next room and the ranch waited outside, damaged but standing, like everything else worth fighting for. The next few days were hard work and slow recovery. The snow began to melt, revealing more damage, fences down, part of the barn roof sagging, supplies ruined. They worked from dawn to past dark, fixing what they could, making lists of what they couldn't. Tom was healing but couldn't do heavy work yet. Jake's frostbitten fingers made him clumsy. Sam's head injury left him dizzy. That meant Caleb carried more of the load than he should have, pushing himself past exhaustion. Eliza watched him wear himself down and finally put her foot down on the 4th day. You're going to rest, she said, blocking the door. You need to sleep. Eat a real meal. Stop before you collapse. She crossed her arms. The ranch needs you alive and functional. Right now, you're neither. Eliza, I'm not asking. Her voice was steel. Go upstairs. Sleep for 4 hours. I'll wake you if anything urgent happens. They stared at each other. Finally, Caleb backed down. 4 hours. Then I'm back to work. Fine. He trudged upstairs and was asleep within minutes. Eliza went back to the kitchen where Sam was drinking coffee, watching the whole exchange with amusement. You're good for him, Sam said. Or I'm bossy and he's too tired to argue. No, you're good for him. Sam set down his cup. Sarah, his first wife, she never pushed back. Just went along with whatever he said, then resented him for it later. You fight him when he's wrong. That's what he needs. What if I'm wrong? Then he'll tell you, and you'll fight about it, and one of you will give in, and you'll move on. Sam smiled slightly. That's what marriage looks like when it's working. Eliza thought about that. Is that what yours was like? Yeah. 30 years with a woman who never let me get away with anything. His face went soft. Lost her 10 years ago. Still miss her every damn day. I'm sorry. Don't be. I had 30 good years. That's more than most people get. He stood, wincing as his back protested. Point is, you and the boss, you're building something real. Don't let doubt or fear or anyone else tell you different. After he left, Eliza stood in the empty kitchen and let herself feel the truth of it. She was building something real, with a man who loved her, who saw her, who needed her strength as much as she needed his honesty. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she left Missouri. It was better. 2 weeks after the storm, a rider appeared on the horizon. Eliza saw him from the kitchen window and called for Caleb. They watched him approach together, tension building. The rider was one of Blackwell's men. He handed Caleb a letter without dismounting, then rode away without a word. Caleb opened it, his face darkening as he read. What is it? Eliza asked. Blackwell. He's calling in the debt. What debt? I borrowed money from him 2 years ago to buy breeding stock. Paid half back already. The rest isn't due for another year. Caleb's hands clenched on the paper. But there's a clause. If I default on any payment, he can call in the full amount immediately. Have you defaulted? No. But he's claiming I have, says the October payment was 3 days late. His voice was bitter. It wasn't. I have the receipt proving I paid on time, but he's taking me to the territorial court anyway. Can he do that? Out here? He can do whatever he wants. Caleb crumpled the letter. The judge is in his pocket. I'll lose, get ordered to pay the full amount immediately. And when I can't, because no one has that kind of cash on hand, he'll take the ranch as payment. Eliza's mind raced. How much do you owe? $3,000. It might as well have been $3 million. They didn't have that kind of money. No one did. Not in liquid cash. When's the hearing? 2 weeks? In Tall Pine? Then we have 2 weeks to find a solution. Caleb looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. There's no solution. He's got me cornered. This is exactly what he's been waiting for. Maybe. But I didn't survive my family, cross a continent, and build a life here just to hand it over to a man like Henry Blackwell. Eliza grabbed the ledgers. There has to be something. A loophole, a way out, something. They spent the next 3 days going through every document, every contract, every scrap of paper related to the ranch. Caleb showed her the loan agreement, the payment receipts, the correspondence with Blackwell. Eliza read it all twice, then a third time. This clause, she said, pointing, the one about default, it says you have to miss a payment deadline. Right, which he's claiming I did. But it doesn't specify which deadline or how the deadline is determined. She looked up, excitement building. It just says agreed upon payment deadline. Where's the agreement that establishes those deadlines? Caleb shuffled through papers. It should be... He stopped. I don't have it. Did you ever have it? I thought I did, but his face went pale. Blackwell said it was a standard schedule, first of every month. I just accepted that. But without a written agreement establishing that schedule, how can he prove you were late? Eliza's heart was racing. If there's no documented deadline, there's no proof of default. He'll lie. Say the agreement existed and I lost it. Let him try. Do you have proof you paid in October? Yes. Receipt from the bank dated October 2nd. And October has how many days? 31. So you paid on the second day of the month. That's hardly late by any reasonable standard. She grabbed his arm. Caleb, we can fight this. We can win. You're talking about going up against the most powerful man in the territory in a court he controls. I'm talking about using the law against him. He thinks he's so smart, putting in that default clause. But he got sloppy with the details. Her mind was working fast now, seeing the angles. We show up with your receipts, prove you paid on time by any reasonable measure, force him to produce this supposed schedule agreement. When he can't, he'll produce a forgery. Then we challenge it, question the dates, the signatures, the terms, make him prove every single detail. She met his eyes. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but it's a chance. And that's more than we had 10 minutes ago. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're terrifying when you're like this. Good. Blackwell should be terrified too. They spent the next week preparing. Eliza organized every document, cross-referenced every date, built their case with meticulous care. Caleb taught her the legal basics he'd picked up over years of dealing with territorial courts. The night before they had to leave for Tall Pine, they sat up late going over everything one more time. This could still go badly, Caleb said quietly. Blackwell has money, influence, connections. We have paper and stubbornness. We have the truth. That has to count for something. In a fair system it would, but this isn't fair. Then we make it fair. Eliza closed the last ledger. We walk in there tomorrow and we fight like our lives depend on it, because they do. Caleb pulled her close, kissed her forehead. Whatever happens, I'm glad you're with me. There's nowhere else I'd be. They rode to Tall Pine at dawn, the wagon loaded with documents. The town was buzzing when they arrived. News of the hearing had spread, and half the territory was turning out to watch. The courthouse was packed. Blackwell sat at the front with his lawyer, looking supremely confident. Constance sat behind him, her smile sharp with anticipation. Caleb and Eliza took their seats. She could feel every eye on them, hear the whispers. The plain mail-order bride trying to save her husband's ranch. How quaint. How doomed. Eliza lifted her chin and stared straight ahead. The judge entered, a tired-looking man named Harrison who avoided making eye contact with anyone. He called the court to order and asked Blackwell's lawyer to present his case. The lawyer stood, smug and polished. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract law. Mr. Rourke borrowed $3,000 from my client with clear terms. He defaulted on the October payment. Objection. Eliza stood. Every head swiveled to stare. The judge blinked. Mrs. Rourke, you're not... I'm representing my husband's interests, and I object to the characterization of default without proof. Blackwell's lawyer looked annoyed. We have the loan agreement right here, which I'd like to see, please. The lawyer handed over the document. Eliza read it carefully, then looked up. Your Honor, this agreement mentions a default clause but doesn't specify payment deadlines. Where's the schedule establishing when payments were due? The lawyer shifted. It was common understanding that payments were due on the first of each month. Common understanding isn't a legal contract. Eliza held up another paper. This is a receipt showing my husband paid on October 2nd. If there's no documented deadline, how can this be considered late? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Order, Mr. Blackwell's counsel. Do you have documentation of the payment schedule? The lawyer and Blackwell exchanged glances. That is, the schedule was verbal. So there's no written agreement establishing deadlines? Mr. Rourke understood. What Mr. Rourke understood and what was legally established are two different things. Eliza's voice carried across the courtroom. Without a written schedule, any payment made within the month is reasonable and timely. My husband paid on October 2nd. That's timely by any fair measure. Judge Harrison looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Rourke makes a valid point. Your Honor, the lawyer was sweating now. The spirit of the agreement, the spirit doesn't matter in contract law. The letter does. The judge turned to Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell, do you have any documentation establishing specific payment deadlines? Blackwell stood, his face dark with anger. The agreement was made in good faith. That's not an answer. The silence stretched tight. Blackwell's jaw clenched. He'd been outmaneuvered and everyone in the room knew it. Case dismissed, Judge Harrison said, bringing down his gavel. Mr. Rourke's debt stands as originally agreed, but there's no grounds for calling it due early. Next case. The courtroom exploded. Caleb grabbed Eliza's hand, squeezing hard. They'd won. They'd actually won. Blackwell stormed out without a word, Constance trailing behind him. The crowd parted for them, whispers following like wasps. Outside, people gathered around Caleb and Eliza, some congratulating, some just curious, all shocked that anyone had stood up to Blackwell and survived. Tom clapped Caleb on the back. Didn't think you had it in you, boss. I didn't, she did. Caleb pulled Eliza close. All her. Not all, Eliza said, but she was smiling. You trusted me enough to let me try. That matters. They rode home in triumph, the sunset painting the sky gold and red. The ranch appeared ahead, still battered from the storm, still needing work, still theirs. That night, they celebrated with the hands, whiskey and laughter and stories told around the fire. Tom was healing well. Jake's fingers were better. Sam smiled more than Eliza had ever seen. And when everyone finally went to bed, Eliza and Caleb climbed the stairs to their room. Truly theirs now. No ghost between them, no careful distance. Caleb pulled her close, his hands gentle on her face. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I know. I love you too. They made love that night with the kind of fierce tenderness that comes from nearly losing everything. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza felt something she'd never felt before. Peace, belonging, home. Not because the struggles were over, they weren't. Blackwell would try again. Winter would return. The ranch would keep demanding everything they had, but they'd face it together, as partners, as equals, as people who'd chosen each other fully and completely, and that made all the difference. Spring came late that year, fighting its way through the last stubborn snowdrifts with a kind of exhausted determination. Eliza stood on the porch watching the land wake up, green pushing through brown, the creek running high with melt, birds returning to rebuild nests in the barn rafters. The ranch had survived winter, so had they. Behind her, the door opened. Caleb emerged with 2 cups of coffee, handing her one without a word. They'd fallen into these quiet mornings together, standing side by side, watching the day begin, not needing to fill the silence with talk. Tom says the south fence needs replacing, Caleb said after a while. Winter tore it up pretty bad. Can we afford it? Barely, but we don't have a choice. He sipped his coffee. I'm thinking of selling some of the young stock early. Won't get top price, but it'll give us cash for repairs. Eliza ran numbers in her head. If we sell now, we'll lose at least 20% of what they'd be worth in fall. I know. But the fence? What if we borrowed the money? From the bank, not Blackwell. Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't want more debt. It's not about want. It's about smart business. She turned to face him. We borrow enough to fix the fence and make it to fall. Sell the stock then at full price. Pay back the loan and still come out ahead. And if something goes wrong, if we lose animals, if prices drop, then we deal with it. But we don't give up profit just because we're afraid. She touched his arm. You taught me the land is hard but honest. Money works the same way. Sometimes you have to risk to gain. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll talk to the bank, but if this goes bad, it won't. And if it does, we'll figure it out, like we always do. They rode into Tall Pine 3 days later. The town had changed since the courthouse victory, or rather, how people looked at them had changed. The whispers were still there, but they carried a different tone now. Respect mixed with wariness. The mail-order bride who'd beaten Blackwell at his own game. The rancher's wife who knew her way around a contract. Constance Blackwell crossed the street when she saw them coming. Eliza counted that as a win. The bank manager, a nervous man named Fletcher, listened to their proposal with increasing interest. He studied the ledgers Eliza had brought, asked sharp questions about cash flow and projected income, ran his own calculations. Your books are remarkably well organized, Mrs. Rourke, he said, impressed. Most ranchers can barely track their own expenses. Most ranchers don't let their wives near the books, Eliza replied. Their loss. Fletcher smiled. Indeed. I think we can work something out. The terms will be strict, full repayment by November, with interest. If you default, we won't, Caleb said firmly. I'll hold you to that. Fletcher began drawing up papers. You know Blackwell won't like this. He's been trying to squeeze you out for years. Giving you access to capital means you can actually compete with him. Let him not like it, Eliza said. We're not doing anything illegal. No, but legal and safe aren't the same thing out here. Fletcher lowered his voice. Watch your back, both of you. Blackwell doesn't forget slights. They signed the papers and left with enough money to repair the fence, buy supplies, and make it through to fall. It felt like breathing room, terrifying and necessary all at once. On the ride home, Caleb was quiet. Finally, he said, "You know he's right. Blackwell's going to retaliate." "I know." "And you're not scared?" "I'm terrified. But I'm not going to let fear make our decisions." She looked at him. "Are you?" "No. But I'm also not going to pretend this is safe. Nothing worth having is safe." Eliza smiled slightly. "I learned that from you." The retaliation came 2 weeks later, though not in the way they expected. Eliza was in the chicken coop when she heard shouting from the barn. She ran out to find Jake and Sam confronting 2 men on horseback. Strangers, rough-looking, with the kind of casual violence that came from knowing no one would stop them. "Where's Rourke?" the bigger one demanded. "Not here," Sam said, his hand near his belt where he kept a knife. "State your business and move on." "Business is with him. We'll wait." "You'll leave, now." The big man grinned. "Or what? You gonna make us, old-timer?" Eliza stepped forward before things could escalate. "I'm Mrs. Rourke. My husband's out checking the north pasture. Whatever you need to say, you can say to me." Both men looked her over with open disdain. "We got a message from Mr. Blackwell. He's willing to buy your ranch. Fair price. Better than you'll get anywhere else." "We're not selling." "You sure about that?" "Things can happen out here. Accidents, fires, cattle getting sick." The threat was barely veiled. "Mr. Blackwell's protection is worth considering." "Protection from what?" Eliza kept her voice level even as her heart raced. "From him?" The big man's grin widened. "Smart lady. You should talk to your husband. Make him see reason." "I'll do that. Now get off our land." They left, but slowly, making a point of their contempt. When they were gone, Sam turned to Eliza, his face pale. "That was a threat, ma'am. Clear as day." "I know." Eliza's hands were shaking. She clenched them to stop it. "When does Caleb get back?" "Another hour, maybe 2. Then we have an hour to decide how to tell him without him doing something stupid." Jake laughed despite the tension. "Good luck with that." When Caleb returned and heard what happened, his face went dark with rage. "He sent men here? To our property? To threaten you?" "To threaten all of us," Eliza corrected. "And yes, that's it. I'm riding to the Double B right now." "And doing what? Starting a fight you can't win?" Eliza grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what he wants. You go over there angry, you'll end up dead or in jail. Either way, he gets the ranch." "I'm not going to let him." "We're not going to let him," she interrupted. "We. Together. But we do it smart." Caleb's fists clenched and unclenched. Sam and Jake watched from a careful distance. Finally, Caleb took a breath. "What do you suggest?" "We document everything, every threat, every incident, every time his men come near our property. We build a case." Eliza's mind was already working. "And we make it very public. Let the whole territory know that if anything happens to us, Blackwell's the first person the law should look at." "The law's in his pocket." "The territorial law, maybe, but there's federal law too. Land rights, interstate commerce, mail fraud. There are ways to bring in outside authorities if we're smart about it." Tom, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. "She's right, boss. You go after him direct, you lose. But you make him the villain in front of people who matter, people outside his control. He's got to back off or risk everything." Caleb looked between them, his jaw working. "This isn't how I wanted to fight." "It's not how anyone wants to fight," Eliza said gently. "But it's the fight we have. So we either do it right or we lose." Over the next month, they built their case. Every time Blackwell's men appeared, and they appeared often, finding excuses to ride through Rourke land, Eliza documented it. Dates, times, witnesses, exact words. She wrote to the territorial governor, to federal land offices, to anyone with authority outside Blackwell's reach. Most letters went unanswered, but some didn't. A federal land agent wrote back asking for more details. A territorial marshal expressed interest in allegations of intimidation and land fraud. It wasn't much, but it was something. The harassment escalated, fences cut, cattle scattered, supplies stolen from the barn. Never enough to destroy them, but enough to make life difficult. Enough to send a message. Eliza documented it all. "He's trying to break you," Sam observed one evening after they'd spent the day rounding up scattered cattle. "Make you desperate enough to sell." "Then he doesn't know us very well," Eliza said. She was exhausted, filthy, and angrier than she'd ever been. But she wasn't broken. Neither was Caleb. If anything, the attacks made him more determined. He worked harder, slept less, pushed himself past any reasonable limit. Eliza watched him wear himself down and knew she had to do something before he collapsed. She found him in the barn late one night, mending tack by lamplight. His hands were shaking with exhaustion. "Come to bed," she said quietly. "Need to finish this." "It'll be there tomorrow." She took the leather from his hands. "You won't be if you don't rest." "I can't rest, not while he's—" His voice cracked. "I can't lose this place, Eliza. It's everything I've built, everything I am." "It's not everything you are." She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You're more than this ranch. You're the man who gave me honesty when everyone else gave me lies, who taught me I was worth more than what people said, who built something real out of nothing." Her voice was fierce. "The ranch is important, but you are more important. Don't destroy yourself trying to save it. If we lose, then we lose, and we start over somewhere else. Together." She meant every word. "I didn't come here for land or money. I came here for you, for us. Everything else is just details." He pulled her close, holding on like she was the only solid thing in his world. "I love you. More than I've ever loved anything." "I know, I love you too." She kissed him gently. "Now come inside. We'll face tomorrow when it comes." That night, they made love with a kind of desperate tenderness, knowing they might lose everything, choosing each other anyway. And afterward, wrapped in darkness in each other's arms, Eliza felt something shift inside her. A certainty. A strength. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That was enough. The breaking point came in early summer. Eliza woke one morning feeling strange, queasy, off balance, exhausted despite a full night's sleep. She tried to ignore it, push through her morning routine, but the nausea wouldn't fade. By noon, she was vomiting behind the house. By evening, she could barely keep down water. Caleb found her sitting on the back steps, pale and shaking. "That's it. I'm taking you to the doctor." "It's just something I ate." "It's not. You've been tired for weeks, and you're never sick." His voice was tight with worry. "We're going. Now." The ride to Tall Pine was agony. Every jolt of the wagon made Eliza's stomach turn. She spent most of the trip leaning over the side, trying not to vomit. Caleb drove like a man possessed, his face white with fear. The doctor examined her while Caleb paced outside. After what felt like hours, the doctor emerged with a strange expression, half amused, half exasperated. "Mrs. Rourke is fine, perfectly healthy, in fact." Caleb stopped pacing. "Then what?" "She's pregnant. About 2 months, I'd estimate." The world stopped. Eliza stared at the doctor, her mind blank. Pregnant. She was pregnant. "You're sure?" Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. "Very sure. Morning sickness, fatigue, sensitivity to smells, all textbook symptoms." The doctor smiled. "Congratulations." Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there looking stunned. "Caleb?" Eliza ventured. He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Wonder, terror, joy, all mixed together in a way that was so painfully honest it hurt to see. "We're having a baby," he said, like he was trying to make the words real. "Apparently. A baby. That's generally how it works." He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms, and held on like she might disappear. "I didn't think, after Sarah couldn't, I thought maybe I couldn't." "Well, you can." Eliza held him back just as tight. "We're having a baby." The reality of it hit her then. A baby. A child growing inside her. A whole new person who would depend on them, need them, reshape their entire world. It was terrifying. It was perfect. The ride home was quieter but charged with a different kind of energy. Caleb kept glancing at her like she was made of glass. Eliza tried not to laugh at his sudden overprotectiveness. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said after the 5th time he asked if she was comfortable. "I know, but—" He stopped, searching for words. "Sarah lost 3 babies. Never made it past 3 months. Every time, it destroyed her a little more. By the end, we'd stopped trying." Eliza's heart twisted. "I'm not Sarah." "I know, but I can't help being scared." "Then be scared." I am too. She took his hand. But don't let fear stop you from being happy. We're having a baby. That's worth celebrating, even if it's scary. His smile was tentative but real. You're right. As usual? I usually am. You should write that down. They told the hands that evening. Jake whooped and lifted Eliza off her feet before Caleb growled at him to be careful. Tom grinned wider than she'd ever seen. Sam got misty-eyed and muttered something about new life on the ranch being good luck. But the celebration was short-lived, because 3 days later, Blackwell made his final move. Fire. Eliza woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. She ran outside to find the barn engulfed in flames, the hands fighting desperately to save the animals inside. Caleb was already there, his face lit orange by the inferno, dragging horses to safety. Get water, Tom was yelling. Form a line! They fought for hours, hauling water from the creek, beating at flames with wet blankets, trying to save what they could. By the time the fire burned itself out, the barn was a smoking ruin. They'd saved most of the horses and cattle, but half their equipment was gone. Feed stores, tools, everything they needed to run the ranch. And in the ashes, they found proof it wasn't an accident. A can of kerosene. Rags soaked in accelerant. Someone had set this fire deliberately. Caleb stood staring at the destruction, his fists clenched. His face was black with soot and streaked with sweat. He looked like a man about to break. He's trying to force us out, Tom said grimly. Destroy what he can't buy. It's working. Jake's voice was hollow. Without that barn, without the equipment, how do we make it through summer, let alone winter? Eliza looked at the ruins, at her exhausted husband, at the men who'd become family, and she felt something inside her crystallize into pure, cold determination. We rebuild, she said. Everyone turned to stare. We what? Caleb asked. We rebuild. Right here. Better than before. Eliza lifted her chin. And we make sure everyone knows why we had to. Every newspaper, every territorial office, every federal agent who'll listen. We make Blackwell famous for this. Eliza, we don't have the money. Then we find it. We borrow more. We ask for help. We do whatever it takes. Her voice was steel. Because if we quit now, every rancher in the territory learns that Blackwell can destroy anyone he wants. But if we rebuild, if we survive this, we prove he's not untouchable. Sam spoke up quietly. She's right. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about whether men like Blackwell get to win by burning everything good people build. I'll work for free until we're back on our feet, Jake added. So will Tom. We don't ask that, Caleb started. You're not asking. We're offering. Tom crossed his arms. You gave us jobs when no one else would. Treated us fair. Let us build something worth defending. We're not walking away now. Caleb looked at them, his wife, his hands, his family, and something in his expression shifted. The defeat faded, replaced by the kind of stubborn determination that had built this ranch in the first place. All right, he said, we rebuild, but we do it smart. Document everything. Make sure the whole territory knows what happened here. Over the next week, Eliza wrote letters to newspapers, to territorial officials, to federal marshals. She didn't accuse Blackwell outright. That would be slander. But she laid out the facts, the threats, the harassment, the suspicious fire. Let people draw their own conclusions. Some of those letters found their way into print. The Cheyenne newspaper ran a story about intimidation tactics in territorial land disputes. A federal land agent announced an investigation into allegations of arson and extortion. Blackwell couldn't stop the story from spreading, and the more it spread, the more dangerous it became for him to act openly. Meanwhile, they rebuilt. Tom designed a better barn layout. Jake and Sam worked 16-hour days hauling materials. Caleb threw himself into the construction with fierce focus, and Eliza managed everything else: the accounts, the supplies, the correspondence, the constant juggling of too many problems with too few resources. She was 3 months pregnant and working harder than ever. The nausea had faded, but exhaustion dragged at her constantly. Caleb begged her to rest. She ignored him. I'll rest when the barn's finished, she said. That could be months. Then I'll rest in months. They argued about it constantly. She was too stubborn. He was too worried. Neither would back down. But they kept working, kept building, kept fighting. Help came from unexpected places. Ranchers they'd never met sent lumber. The bank extended their loan without being asked. Even Morrison at the general store offered supplies at cost, muttering about doing what's right. Constance Blackwell stopped going to town entirely. The whispers said her husband was furious, that federal attention was making his business dealings difficult, that his reputation was suffering. Good, Eliza thought. Let him suffer. The barn took shape slowly, timber by timber, nail by nail. It was back-breaking work, but every board raised felt like a victory. Every day they didn't quit was a defeat for Blackwell. And then, 6 weeks after the fire, the federal marshal arrived. He was a serious man named Garrett, with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He spent 3 days interviewing people, examining evidence, asking questions. He talked to Eliza and Caleb for hours, going through every document, every incident, every detail of Blackwell's campaign. When he finally left, his face was grim. I can't promise anything, but what I've seen here, it's enough to warrant investigation. If I find proof Blackwell was involved in that fire, there will be consequences. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was more than they'd had. 2 weeks later, word spread through Tall Pine like wildfire. Federal agents had raided the Double B Ranch. Blackwell was being investigated for arson, extortion, fraud, and half a dozen other charges. His assets were frozen pending the outcome. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He was cornered. The final confrontation came not with violence, but with paperwork. Blackwell's lawyer approached Caleb with an offer. Drop all accusations, sign a statement saying the fire was an accident, and Blackwell would forgive the entire loan, plus cash compensation for damages. Caleb brought the offer home and showed it to Eliza. That's a lot of money, he said carefully. Enough to finish the barn, buy new equipment, make it through winter comfortably. And all we have to do is let him get away with trying to destroy us. Yes. Eliza stared at the papers. It would be so easy to say yes, to take the money, rebuild, move on. They could be comfortable, safe, free of debt. But Blackwell would win, and the next rancher he targeted would have no one to point to and say, they fought back and survived. What do you want to do? She asked Caleb. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I want to tell him to go to hell, but I also want you and our baby to have a secure future. Our baby will have parents who taught them that some things matter more than money. Eliza took his hand. We turned down the offer. We let the investigation continue, and we proved that doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing. Caleb smiled, tired but genuine. You're sure? I'm sure. They sent the lawyer away without a signature. The investigation continued, and 3 months later, federal charges were filed. Blackwell was arrested, his ranch seized, his empire crumbling. It didn't undo what he'd done. The barn he'd burned was still gone, though its replacement stood in its place. Stronger, better built, a testament to survival. The months of harassment couldn't be erased. The fear couldn't be forgotten. But justice, however imperfect, had been served. By the time fall arrived, everything had changed. The new barn stood tall and solid. The cattle were fat and healthy, ready for market. The loan from the bank was paid off early, and Eliza was 6 months pregnant, finally slowing down enough to let others help. They sold their stock at fall market for the best prices the territory had seen in years. Between the proceeds and the compensation from Blackwell's seized assets, they had enough to not just survive the winter, but thrive. The ranch that had started as one man's desperate dream had become something more. A real home, a real family. A place that proved survival wasn't just about strength, it was about stubbornness, strategy, and refusing to let cruelty win. Winter came again, but gentler this time. The house was warm, the barn was full. The men had their own quarters in the rebuilt bunkhouse, complete with a proper stove and real beds. And on a freezing January night, with snow falling soft outside, Eliza gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and brutal. Caleb paced outside the bedroom while the doctor worked. Sam made coffee no one drank. Jake and Tom sat in tense silence, waiting. And then, just before dawn, a baby's cry pierced the air. Caleb was upstairs before the doctor could call him. He found Eliza propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty, and holding a tiny, red-faced infant who was screaming her displeasure at being born into a cold world. "A girl," Eliza said, her voice rough but joyful. "We have a daughter." Caleb stared at the baby like he'd never seen anything more miraculous. Carefully, as if she might shatter, he took her from Eliza's arms. The baby stopped crying, stared up at him with unfocused eyes, and yawned. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's wrinkled and bald and looks like an angry potato," Eliza corrected, "but she's ours." "What should we name her?" Eliza had thought about this. "Hope, because that's what she is." Caleb looked at his wife, the woman who'd answered a cruel joke of a letter and turned it into something real. The woman who'd stood beside him through storms and fires and battles he couldn't have won alone. The woman who'd given him a future he'd stopped believing in. "Hope Rourke," he said, testing the name. "I like it." The hands came up one by one to meet her. Tom looked terrified, holding something so small. Jake made ridiculous faces, trying to get her to smile. Sam got misty-eyed again and had to excuse himself. And in the days that followed, as Eliza recovered and hope grew stronger, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Feedings in the night, laundry constantly drying by the fire, the sound of a baby crying mixing with the sounds of work outside. It was chaotic, exhausting. Nothing like what Eliza had imagined when she left Missouri. It was everything. Spring came again, and with it, new challenges. Hope was colicky and refused to sleep. The cattle had twins that needed extra care. A late frost threatened the garden Eliza had planted, but they handled it. Together. Always together. One morning, Eliza stood on the porch with Hope in her arms, watching Caleb and the hands work in the south pasture. The baby was finally sleeping, her tiny fist clutching Eliza's finger. The sun was warm on her face. The land stretched out green and alive as far as she could see. She thought about the girl she'd been, plain, invisible, unwanted. The girl whose sisters had mocked her into answering a letter meant as a joke. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who'd built a life from nothing, who'd fought off land barons and winter storms, who'd learned that worth wasn't given by others. It was claimed, defended, lived. Caleb looked up from his work and saw her watching. He smiled, waved. She waved back. Sam appeared beside her, moving quiet as always. "Never thought I'd see this place come alive again after Sarah died." "But you did it. Brought it back." "We all did it." "No, ma'am. You started it. The boss, he was just surviving before you came. Now he's living." Sam smiled. "That's the difference." After he left, Eliza stood there holding her daughter and thought about what he'd said. About survival versus living. About how easy it was to get the two confused. For years she'd survived. Endured. Made herself small enough that the world's cruelty might pass her by. But Wyoming had taught her different. The frontier didn't reward small. It demanded you take up space, fight for what was yours, refuse to disappear. It had cost her. Every day cost her. Her hands were rough now, her face weathered. She looked older than 24. The softness she'd started with was gone, burned away by work and worry and the kind of strength that only came from refusing to break. But she'd gained more than she'd lost. A husband who loved her not despite her strength, but because of it. A daughter who would grow up knowing her mother was someone worth emulating. Land that was hers, not borrowed, not permitted, but owned. A life that was hers. Hope stirred in her arms, making the small sounds that meant she'd wake soon and demand to be fed. Eliza smiled and went inside to the kitchen where coffee was waiting and accounts needed checking and 100 small tasks would fill the day. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't easy, but it was real and earned and hers. And in the end, that was worth more than all the beauty her sisters possessed. More than all the easy lives that had rejected her. More than anything she'd left behind. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask, Eliza would tell her the story. Not the softened version where everything worked out perfectly, but the true one. The one where a cruel joke became an escape. Where hard work and stubbornness mattered more than looks or luck. Where a woman they called worthless built an empire on grit and refusal to quit. She'd tell her daughter that true worth wasn't seen by the world first. It was claimed by those brave enough to live it. That sometimes the best revenge against people who underestimated you was simply refusing to fail. And most importantly, she'd tell her that strength wasn't about never being afraid or tired or ready to quit. Strength was doing what needed doing anyway. Was choosing partnership over pride. Was building something real even when everyone said you couldn't. But that would come later. For now, Eliza fed her daughter, checked the accounts, planned dinner, and watched the ranch run with the smooth efficiency of something well-built and well-loved. Caleb came in at noon, dirty and tired and happy. He kissed Eliza, kissed Hope, stole a bite of bread from the counter. "I love you," he said, like he said every day now. Like he was making up for years of not saying it enough. "I love you too," Eliza replied, and meant it with everything she was. Outside, the land waited, hard and honest and unforgiving. Inside, they'd built something that could withstand it. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but they'd built it together. And that made all the difference. In the end, that was the truth that mattered. Not that life was easy or fair or kind, but that when you found people worth fighting for, worth building with, worth choosing every single day, you could survive anything, even yourself, even the world's cruelty, even the crushing weight of being told you weren't enough, because the only opinion that mattered was the one you had of yourself. And Eliza Rourke, once Eliza Hale, the invisible daughter, the plain sister, the joke, had learned to see herself clearly, not as the world defined her, but as she'd earned the right to be defined. Worthy, strong, irreplaceable. A woman who'd turned rejection into redemption and proved that the best revenge was simply living well.